And we are recording. Welcome, one and all. We're talking about gender. So both the first artifact in the discussion and one of our readings is kind of a breakdown of Judith Butler's performativity theory, which is like the way I normally summarize it, because I have been talking about this for a very long time, is that Judith Butler kind of believes that gender is a verb that you do, that to be a woman in society is to do the things that a woman does and fulfill the role of womanhood and womaning, and it has very long been kind of held up as the legitimating theory behind trans identity, being that, you know, if gender is a performance, then it's not something essential to you, it's something that you do out in the world. It's a sociality that you engage in. So it doesn't matter what body parts you have while you're doing it. Ergo, you know, your chromosomes or gonads or whatever biological marker people are obsessed with today is not what makes you your gender. It's your behaviors, and appearance, I think, to an interesting to explore extent. And Butler engages with that one too a fair bit, about how much of gender is behavioral versus aesthetic. You know, because so much of how you interact with the world is visual, like how you decide to dress yourself and do your hair and face. And yeah, it's just there's kind of a fuzzy area that I always think is interesting to explore about how do we decide what we're going to legitimate as a gender marker or not. Because like by performativity theory, if what you want to do is pursue a gender transition of any kind, then what you ought to do is emulate a gender role. And in doing so, you kind of have to decide what belongs to which gender role, or at least be informed of that and kind of play by those rules. Which is, I don't know, it's a little fraught, it's a little loaded. Do you two have thoughts?
Yeah. So growing up, we were always told to kind of fight against, you know, like impose gender roles. And so if gender is all about performity, but there are people who you know, I know and identify as someone who's a woman, but do all the performative actions of a man. I mean, like it just sort of, it falls apart in the lived experience of a lot of people. And so I'm wondering if I'm missing something, or if you guys find that as well.
Yes, and one of the things that I find really interesting about Judith Butler posing this theory is that Judith Butler is one of the people that I think does not perform a gender role in particular. Judith Butler is gay and doesn't, I don't know if they identify as transgender exactly, but they use they them pronouns and have kind of voluntarily removed themselves from gendering. So I think part of what makes me, and like honestly, I also have a lot of confusion and grappling that goes on with performativity theory. But part of what makes it more legitimate to me is reading it, knowing the perspective it's coming from. That when Butler is writing about womaning as a verb, they're doing so as somebody assigned female at birth that has kind of chosen not to woman. As an expression of like a deeper and more fleshed out self. And I also think that the performances of gender are often much more complex and subtle and nuanced than we're super tuned into. Because like there's the obvious stuff like, do you wear a dress or pants, makeup or no makeup, long hair or short hair? There's like the really obvious like 1950s gender markers, but then there's also like, if you go into film theory, you can talk a lot about the difference between the male gaze and the female gaze in terms of how the camera works. And what's that about? How do we decide which is which?
I think it also depends on the era too. Like several years ago, men also wore heels and wore makeup and wigs and stuff. So I do think it varies by the year, but like the performance side of it reminds me of Goffman's theory of like on stage, backstage performance. It's a sociology concept of like the way how we present ourselves like outside of the home is like how we would present on like a stage or something. And there's like the backstage stuff like that.
Yeah. And so sorry,
I was gonna say, one of the things I find most interesting is the linguistic differences. You know, you see it a lot. There's like an ad going around saying like, sorry, not sorry. And my roommate and I were talking about this, about like women are being told, oh, don't apologize so much. But it acts as a way for women who are socialized together as women to acknowledge that they share the space with other women. It's, you know, whereas for men, it's a sign, it's, you know, apparently a sign of weakness. So by saying, oh, you don't need to apologize for taking up space, that's not actually what's happening. It's an acknowledgement, but it looks like an apology. And it's just that linguistic difference.
That's a really good point.
Is not necessarily, it's not even necessarily between like gendered men and women. It's about who gets socialized with who. And oftentimes it's girls, you know, and women who are socialized together. Learn to speak a different, I don't want to say, it's almost like a different set of social grammar.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And that like, you know, you can have, you know, somebody who outwardly appears male and then can talk like someone who is, you know, been socialized as a woman. And I don't know if that's, I mean, like, but that doesn't make them any more of a woman. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, honestly, that's my experience. There's definitely kind of a code switching I do between people who do and do not know that I'm trans. Because like when I'm talking to people who do know I'm trans, I will talk like myself. And like with kind of all of the comfortable mannerisms that I've been using for 27 years, 20 of which were spent as a girl. Like there's a pattern of conversation that is natural to me because I've been using it since as long as I've been able to talk. And there's also the one that I put on when I'm like really worried about passing. And like the way I talk when I'm attempting to act normal is quite different. Doesn't really sound a lot like me. It's a lot less expressive. It's a lot less emotive. And I don't say sorry nearly as much, and I talk a lot less, and I like try to angle my sentences down as opposed to up. Yeah, no, like there are a ton of gender markers just in like how you literally speak your own language. That people definitely pick up on. Like when I talk naturally around people who don't know I'm trans, they know something is up with me. They just can't pin down what.
Setting off the gaydar.
That is so interesting. Okay, so here's my question.
Yeah.
That, learning to speak differently, the code switching, is that something that you started doing is it something you started doing actively, or is it something you started doing? Yeah. Is it is it based off of stereotypes that you found, or is it something that you picked up with by socializing with other men?
It's the latter. I mean, I don't know. You spend enough time around people, you do tend to pick up their accent.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying.
Yeah.
So like, my cis guy affect is mostly me copying my brother.
I
But
always forget people can have brothers.
right, I have like a stay-at-home specimen for much of my childhood that I can copy.
Oh yes, Sherlock, let's write this down.
Right, so like most of my like cis guy affect is copied from my brother, but I also like my brother and I are very different. It wouldn't work if I just like did my Caleb impression all day. So it's like a blend of my brother and just like other cis guys that I spend time around. So it is intentional. I do it less now. First because I'm out more often than I used to be. I'm a lot more confident in myself and less worried about it. So like it's less of a I keep being trans a secret much less often. But where is it going with this? Space off other people. And when I was early transition and not passing very well, the voice is usually what would make the difference. But when I was doing a very androgynous gender thing, the way I would speak and pitch my voice and use language would usually tip it one way or the other. So there were interactions where I had to reveal that I was a biological female, quote, quote, and I didn't want people to know I was trans, so I would pitch my voice femininely and get gendered female, versus there'd be times when I'd just be like having a customer service interaction in public and I wanted to be called sir. So I pitch my voice down and use my male mannerisms and get gendered that way. That when I was right on the line in the middle, how I talked would tip it one way or the other.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like body language also feeds into that as well. That's like a huge thing of like how you walk, the kinds of like facial expressions you exhibit, even like the way how you sit down.
Especially the way you sit down. Guys are so fucking weird about sitting. I'm sorry for cursing, but come on.
They are weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have another question.
Yeah.
And you guys can direct me back on topic if you feel like we're straying too far. But this was years ago. But somebody trying to explain how that they understood that they were trans. They said it was like if you ever get misgendered and you're just like, oh, that's not me. And I've been misgendered quite a bit because I used to work at a Boy Scout camp.
Oh yeah.
And the little kids are like, I don't understand what's going on here.
This is a boy place. You have to.
I mean, like 10-year-olds are like, I'm really confused right now. It didn't help that like I can grow some facial hair a little bit, and people, and so I looked like an older teenage boy, you know. Um and every time I got called sir or he, I was just like, ugh, like, no, that's not me. And so I found myself doing more, feminine gender expressions that were specifically banned at camp for men. So like painting my nails was strictly not allowed for the Boy Scouts, but girls were allowed to do it. And so that was the kind of thing I'd be like, as long as I painted nails, I didn't get misgendered. But it was that idea of like that instant recoil of like, that's just not me.
Yeah.
And that is that, I mean, like, I guess the question is an essentialism. Like, if it really is just performative, then how do we account for that feeling of essentialism? And I know like Mormon theology actually somewhat validates trans identities because they believe the soul has a gender that can be different from your gendered body or your whatever, your gonads. So like, how do we account for that? Because I mean, me personally, it does, like, it is easy for me to say, okay, well, my soul has, an identity, and whether or not that matches my corporeal body, that that can account for it. But if you don't take into account the theology of a soul, how do you explain it?
See, this is kind of where I think eventually we just hit a wall with theorizing. Like, I don't think, and forgive me if I missed a big old section of this, but I don't think Judith Butler has ever posed a universal theory of why do people believe themselves to have particular genders. And like, I don't know, one of my favorite YouTubers just put it in this language of, there are some parts of the human experience that we're just not very good at proving. Like, I don't know why I fell in love with my wife, but I did. I love her. I can't show you a rock that proves what love is. I can't like reach into my anatomy and pull out like, this is my love gallstone. See? Like, it's not, and like I also can't like reach into my anatomy and pull out, and this is my transgender gallstone. This is what did it. Like, as far as I'm aware, we have not actually made any progress on that, and I don't think we're gonna.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of stuff like feelings of love and spirituality and sense of self that are just pretty deeply felt and feel essential to human beings that we are very bad at locating a source for. Which,
so I don't know, I kind of almost feel like that proves the necessity for studying through a spiritual lens. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
academics ignoring this, spirituality because it's not something that's provable. Maybe they're an atheist. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Just something I'm thinking about, like, as I'm about to graduate, I'm like, did I just waste 5 years, or is there something here that's actually important that can't be learned someplace else? Anyways.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think there's something valuable here.
Me too.
Same.
I don't know. I just think, I don't know. Yeah, I think there are lots of ways to talk about gender.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in terms of how we deal with the fact that there are, broadly speaking, two common types of people that move through our society, and then a smattering of folks in between or around those like two big zones. Like, we've got male zone and female zone, and then kind of a sprinkling around that. I think in terms of like describing that kind of obvious reality of how we live in society and how like every human society has lived, I think performativity theory works pretty well. That you've got roughly half of people behave in this cloud of performances, and roughly half of people behave in this cloud of performances.
Yeah.
And like when you're talking about society, I think that that's a better way to go about it than trying to crack into like, well, what about the X chromosome makes them wear lipstick? Or, you know, like where is the soul? Why does it make the genders do the thing sometimes? We got to find it, pin it down. I think performativity works better than trying to find an essential explanation for why we behave the way we do in society. But if we're going to start talking about things like, I don't know, medical ethics around transition and you know, how people go about expressing themselves, usually I think we veer into other kinds of language.
Yeah. I also like, I know there's been some studies that have been looking into like the brain chemistry, like a neurological approach, but I'd be concerned of like, if that would be weaponized against the trans community to be used as a means of like trying to cure individuals.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, because neuroscience has been weaponized against communities in the past. So
yeah.
And today.
Yeah.
Like ongoing.
Yep.
Forever.
Yep.
You know what's this is a side tangent, but I was just thinking about like I take medication for ADHD and I get criticized for it. I'm like, but I got criticized for being too ADHD. Like, you wanted to cure me then, and now I'm more cured, and you're criticizing the cure.
No, you weren't supposed to receive medicine for it. You were supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps until you rewired your neuro circuits.
Because that works.
Got no bootstraps.
Oh, so, well, that would do it.
Yeah.
You just got to get yourself some bootstraps and then pull on them really hard.
Yep.
I have no. Oh, so if we were to shift over into the other artifacts, one of them having to do with trans people participating in sports, and how you know, lots of groups of people, including this Jewish organization in the article, is saying, hey, don't do that. Making laws about who can go into what places is bad. We know this. We've seen this one before. Don't do it. I think that talking about trans issues tends to, you kind of pull the thread on a lot of things that are just inherently and systemically unfair. Like talking about medical ethics around transition tends to just crack open the whole medical ethics bundle about what kinds of treatment you are allowed to just say that you need based on your own experience, and what do you need a specialist to sign off on, and what do you need 4 specialists to sign off on, and which kinds of behavior are just banned all the time, or which kinds of treatments are banned all the time, rather. So like when you're doing it with sports, my gripe about it, whenever people are complaining that like, oh, you can't let trans athletes compete, what if it's not fair? Well, sports aren't fair. Every single professional basketball player is in an unheard of height percentile. It's not, we never decided that people over 6'5" couldn't play basketball because it gives them an unfair advantage. That would be silly. Or rather, maybe we should do that. Because having entire sports leagues that are only accessible to like enormous titans are, no, this isn't a fair situation. The kind of body you have always determines how you perform in sports. And fundamentally, when you start putting millions and millions of dollars on the line over the outcome of a game, then you start putting real economic stakes on just like the inherent differences between people's bodies.
Yeah, I think I think the problem is we've split it into, you know, men and women's teams. And so a woman who's too good to be on the women's team can't just move over to the men's team. Like
Yeah.
it's there's an implication that men and women have to be different there. That's why we have separate things. And to be fair, there are a lot of biological reasons why they don't
Right.
compete in the same categories, you know, because there are, you know, but it kind of reinforces that there have to be differences. And if someone is competing at a different level, there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and like it also doesn't take the sports into consideration. Like if the sport you're doing is running,
Mm-hmm.
then there's a lot of evidence to suggest that testosterone is a performance enhancing drug.
Mm-hmm.
That bodies which have gone through testosterone puberty are just markedly better at running across the board. That I remember listening to an interview with like one of the best female track athletes in the country, and she was saying that her best times are about the same as like a really good high school athlete who's a boy. Now, like testosterone, yeah, if you're doing running, then it matters. But if you're doing, for example, hockey or soccer or like complex games that involve strategy, then the gender differential falls away pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And like that reality of how the game works is not factored into how you separate sports. That if you're playing, look, if you're playing basketball, your height tends to matter a lot more than your gender, but we don't have height brackets for basketball. We still have the gender brackets.
I'd watch the height brackets.
Wouldn't that be great?
I would watch the height brackets too.
5-foot basketball.
Right, it would be great.
It's I'm watching my 4-year-old nephew play t-ball. That's a height bracket I'd watch.
Like they do it a little bit where some sports, like with boxing, you've got like weight categories because they've just kind of like all agreed that it does not, it's not fair to let a guy who is 250 pounds of muscle punch someone who is 150 pounds and a much more wiry build. We're not here to watch someone get his skull knocked off. So we've done like weight brackets.
They do that with like actual wrestling too, not just like But you see on TV is not real wrestling, but like the actual competitive, like Olympic kind of wrestling, they do that. They have weight brackets, not gender brackets.
So they don't have gender brackets at all.
Point taken.
Yeah, they don't have that until I think like high school or something. I remember growing up in wrestling and it was co-ed. It was just basically on your weight. And that was it.
Right. And like for a lot of sports, that makes sense. So I guess
archery.
Oh my God, archery. Yeah, no, I just think once you start pulling the whole like, well, is it fair to let trans people compete in sports? What you end up with is, well, sports aren't really fair.
Yeah.
And when you start putting millions and millions of dollars on the line, it kind of matters that sports aren't fair. And we all like to, well, the ESPN likes to pretend like, no, we fixed the fairness issues. The boys play with boys and girls play with girls, and that's what makes it fair. And we don't have to worry about that anymore. Now it's all just skill. But like, no, that's not how fairness works. And if you want to get really into it, then you should probably have things like a league for rich people who have been training their whole lives while eating high protein diets with a personal trainer, and kids who got really good playing in high school.
Yep.
And no, it's like sports have never been fair.
As I say, I saw a post online. They're like, we really want a steroids league for any idiot out there who wants to just juice up. I want to see what they can do. I want to see how high they can jump.
Honestly, I would be into that actually.
So it's such an interesting thing because we want to make it competitive because that's what makes it exciting. If it's too unbalanced, then we don't like the sport. It just feels like like bullying. Yeah, I don't know.
I've also always quietly wondered, like, how much of the men's and women's sports separation is because, like, America's sports psyche would not be able to handle it when the women started thrashing the men at their favorite sports.
Soccer.
Yeah, like if the women's soccer team played against any sports league at any game in America, they would crush them.
Or even hockey. There's different styles of hockey between men's and women's hockey, but like women's hockey, they have a lot more skill.
So I don't know. I think that's also part of it, is that there's a pronounced assumption that all men are better at all sports.
Yeah.
And that's why they only freak out when trans women compete in women's sports. Nobody has ever really raised a fuss about trans men competing in men's sports leagues. I mean, we are often not allowed to, but that's not what gets news coverage. No one cares about that. When people
No
get
one
up in
cares
arms about it.
like even all the discussions on transness is all focused on trans women.
Yeah. It's just what's actually going on is this deep-rooted assumption that trans women are men who want to cheat at various things by pretending to be a woman to like lower the difficulty stakes on their lives.
Yeah.
Which is gross and also bizarre.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack with this. This is
this is an academic career. Our recording has definitely gone too long. Do you guys want to throw out some last thoughts before we wrap it up?
We forgot to talk about Donald Trump, the last artifact.
Did we?
He's bad.
Did we though? Yeah.
He's getting
He's
old.
a terrible human. Now we've talked about him.
I'm just holding out for him to just die of old age. So
The Simpsons have predicted it.
when do they say he's gonna die?
I can't remember. I remember seeing like some kind of image of the Simpsons predicting it though.
Oh yeah, there's a picture of Donald Trump running for president that came out of The Simpsons, and I want to say like 2009.
They've predicted a lot.
I think they predicted Donald Trump's death too. I think it was semi-recent.
I try not to root for human deaths because all human deaths are tragic in their own way.
Yeah.
But
Karma.
I worship Viking gods. I can wish for death all I want. We're good.
There's a benefit to that. Picking and choosing the gods you worship. Some of them are a little more amenable to revenge and hate. And I don't want to say hate, but
listen, I've got a lovely little shrine to 3 Germanic pagan deities that were also held by several Viking cultures, and I've got my chill, happy fertility god. I've got my mother goddess with foresight and destiny, and then I've got my ruthless protector god. All 3 of them have served me very well.
Love that.
Do you want to end the recording?
Yeah, I think we're good there.
Okay.
We don't like Donald Trump. The end.
Yep.